She was dying in the July heat, burning alive with fever, and the only thing she begged him not to do was take off her dress. He could have. She couldn't have stopped him. But Silas Hole made a choice in that moment that would change both their lives forever. What was she hiding underneath that wool? And what kind of man chooses mercy when no one is watching? What this story teaches us, real strength isn't in the fist. It's in knowing when to stay still and let someone else find their voice. This channel is home to stories of the American West, where love is earned in dust and silence, where a mother's grief outlasts a judge's power, and where the smallest act of human kindness can save a life no law would protect. If that kind of story moves you, hit like, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you never miss the next one.
The road to Copper Creek was just a hard-baked rut in the earth after 6 weeks with no rain. Silas Hole was riding his cranky horse Drummer, feeling as sour as the Texas heat. He had spent all morning fighting with the bank over a loan he knew he would not get. Then, all of a sudden, his horse just stopped dead in its tracks. Drummer's ears flattened, and he refused to take another step. Silas squinted and saw a dark lump in the road about 30 yards off. It was too big to be a coyote, but way too still. Curious, since Drummer was not the type to spook at something dead, he dismounted and walked toward it, the sun branding the back of his neck. It was a woman, passed out in the dirt. She was wearing a heavy, long-sleeved wool dress, buttoned right up to her chin. It was soaked in sweat. He knelt down and touched her shoulder, then yanked his hand back. Her skin was burning up, just scorching hot. He gently turned her over. Her face was red and blistered, her lips cracked and white. A little sound escaped her lips. "Easy now," Silas said softly. "I am not going to hurt you." Her eyes flew open, wild with fear, like a cornered animal. She did not say a word, just grabbed the collar of that wool dress and held on for dear life. "All right, I'm getting you out of this heat," he told her. He lifted her onto his horse, surprised at how light she was. She felt like a sick child. He got on behind her, and the heat coming off her body was like a furnace. He knew that dress was cooking her alive. He reached for the top button to give her some air, and she absolutely exploded. With a strength he could not believe, she started clawing and screaming at him. "Do not!" she shrieked. "Please do not take it off!" Silas snatched his hand back as if he had been burned. She fell against him, trembling uncontrollably. "Okay," he said, his voice low. "It stays on. I promise." She went limp in his arms. In that 100-degree heat, he could not make sense of it. A cold feeling washed over him, something he had not felt since Emmeline. He spurred Drummer on, riding hard for his ranch. The place was bone dry, the creek just a memory. He carried her inside to the spare room, the one that used to be his sister's. He knew that dress was a death sentence, but he had given his word, so he did what he could, soaking the outside of the wool with cool water and trying to get a few drops between her lips. For 3 straight days she burned with fever. Even in her delirium, she fought to keep that dress on, always whispering, "Please do not take it off." The words echoed in his head while he worked, while he sat on the porch at night. On the 4th day, he brought her some broth. He found her awake, huddled in the corner like a frightened animal. She watched his every move. He stopped at the door. "It is just broth," he said, setting it on a nearby table before backing away to the wall. "My name is Silas Hole. You have been sick for 3 days. I have not touched your dress, and I will not." She stared at him for a long time, searching for a lie. Finally, she reached for the bowl, her hands shaking, and drank without ever looking away. When she finished, she said one word. "Cora." He nodded. "Fair enough, Cora. There is more when you are ready." As he turned to leave, her quiet voice stopped him. "Why did not you?" she asked. "The dress. You could have taken it off. I was too weak to stop you." Something painful tightened in his chest. "I know," he said. That is why I did not. He went out to the porch and slammed his fist into a post, splitting his knuckles open. It was not about her. It was about a memory of another woman he had not done enough to help. Weeks went by. Cora remained quiet and cautious. The drought worsened, and Silas lost another cow. He came inside one night, exhausted and defeated. "You lost another one," Cora said from the doorway. "Yeah," he sighed. "Third this month." "Your water is too low," she stated. He almost laughed. "Tell me something I do not know." "No," she insisted, her voice surprisingly firm. "You are digging in the wrong place. The spring that feeds the creek moved. The water is somewhere else now." Silas just stared at her. "How in the world do you know that?" She just looked away. "I just know things." He thought for a second, then stood up. "All right then, Miss Knows Things. Show me." She led him out to a small patch of ground that was just a bit greener than the rest. She put her hand flat on the dirt. "Dig here," she said, "about 5, maybe 6 feet down. You will find it." "Don't," she told him, her gaze finally lifting from the ground. "You'll lose a whole day's work." But he just shook his head and dug. It took him till sunset, but down at 5.5 feet, muddy water started to fill the hole. By dawn, it was a real well. Silas stood over it, peering at the dark water before looking at Cora on the porch. He thought he saw the faint hint of a smile on her face. "Well, I'll be," he muttered. "You probably will be," she said, "but not today." That night, a scream tore Silas from his sleep. He was on his feet in a second, grabbing the lamp from the hall and stopping at her door. The screaming was gone, replaced by a low, desperate whisper. "Please don't take it off. Please don't." His hand rested on the doorknob. Every part of him wanted to go in there. But he knew what happened when a man forced his way into a woman's fear. So he just sat down on the floor, his back against her door, and he stayed. He listened to her cry and beg until it all faded into a fragile silence. He didn't move a muscle. His legs went numb and his back ached, but he stayed right there. When the first rays of sun came through the window, he heard her door creak open behind him. Cora stood there, her eyes all red and puffy, clutching the collar of that dress. She just stared at him on the floor. "You stayed?" she whispered. "I stayed. But why?" He slowly got to his feet, his joints cracking. He looked her square in the eye and said the only true thing he knew. "Because the last time someone I cared for needed me to stay, I left. I went looking for a fight instead. And she died because I was too bull-headed to be the man she needed." Cora's face changed then. That wall around her started to crumble. "Who?" "My sister, Emaine." After a long quiet, she asked, "What happened to her?" Silas walked to the kitchen and put the coffee on. Cora followed, sitting at the table as he told her the story. It came out in fits and starts, like pulling rusty nails from old wood. She married a fella named Virgil Cates, a merchant. Well-respected, sat in the front pew each Sunday. The whole town thought he was God's gift. "Emaine came to me 2 times, Silas said, wrapping his hands around his coffee mug. "First time, she had a bad bruise on her arm. Said she fell. I knew better, but she begged me to leave it be. So I did. The second time," he paused, swallowing hard. "She had a split lip and a look in her eyes. A look just like yours." Cora flinched but held his gaze. "I lost my temper," Silas went on. "I went right to Virgil's store in broad daylight and beat him something fierce. Broke his jaw and 3 ribs. I thought I was saving her." "You weren't?" "No, I just made everything worse. The town called me a brute. The sheriff threw me in a cell for 2 weeks. And while I was locked up, Virgil moved Emaine north to his family's place where I couldn't get to her." The coffee sat untouched. "She sent me 1 letter," Silas said. "Said she was fine. But I could see her hand was shaking when she wrote it. The letters were all jagged." Cora whispered, I know. They found her in a river 3 months later, he said, staring at the tabletop. Called it an accident. Virgil played the grieving husband at the funeral. The whole town pitied him. I knew what he'd done, but I couldn't prove a thing. By the time I figured out that patience and the law were the right way to handle it, she was already gone. He looked up at Cora. I learned something from all that. Being angry isn't the same as being helpful. And sometimes, the hardest thing a man can do is just sit down and listen. The kitchen was still. Outside, a mockingbird started its song as the Texas heat pressed against the windows. Cora's hands were flat on the table, her sleeves pulled down tight over her wrists. The man I'm running from, she said slowly, he's a lot like your Virgil, a merchant, a man people look up to, a man whose word is taken as gospel. Silas felt a chill despite the heat. That's what makes it impossible, she said, her eyes meeting his. He just held her gaze, not pushing, not making promises he couldn't keep. He simply nodded. Impossible ain't the same as hopeless, he said softly. Cora just looked at him, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. For now, in that sweltering kitchen, with a man who had stayed, that was enough. A change happened after that morning. Cora still wore that heavy wool dress in the blistering heat, but she carried herself differently. It was less like armor and more like a bad habit she couldn't break. She stopped jumping every time Silas walked by or reached for something. He noticed but didn't say a word. Then one Tuesday, when it was so hot the chickens wouldn't even come out of the shade, he told her, I'm heading into Ridgewater for supplies. You need anything? Cora was at the window watching the dust devils dance in the yard. She turned around. I need you to buy some cotton fabric, a light color, enough for a new dress. Silas blinked. I want to make something I can breathe in, she said, pulling at the suffocating wool collar. This thing is cooking me alive. Then why wear it? Because what's under it is worse than the heat, she said, her voice flat. But I figure if I make something new myself with my own 2 hands, maybe I can take this one off without feeling exposed to the whole world. Silas grabbed his hat. What color? It doesn't matter. It matters to me. What color? She looked at him, a long pause stretching between them. Blue, she finally said. Light blue, like the morning sky. He bought the fabric and thread and some buttons, too. He didn't know the first thing about making a dress, but he reckoned if a woman was going to stitch her world back together, she should have the right materials for the job. When he got back, he put the package on the table. Cora opened it, her fingers tracing the soft cotton. Her whole face softened and her eyes got bright. She pressed the fabric to her cheek. Thank you, she said. It's just cloth. No, she said quietly. It isn't. She started cutting that evening while Silas sat nearby, cleaning his tack. For the first time, the quiet between them was comfortable. You're handy with those scissors, he commented. My mother was a seamstress, she said, her hands moving with purpose. She taught me before I could even read. Smart woman. She was, Cora said, then paused. She's gone now. Died before all this. That's the one mercy I've got. Silas put down the leather he was working. Can I ask you something? You can ask. This man you're running from, does he know where you are? Her scissors stopped. Not yet. But he'll look. He always looks, she continued, setting the scissors down. Not 'cause he wants me back. It's because I know things. Things that could ruin a man like him. What kind of things? She met his eyes. The kind of things that get a woman killed for knowing. The old anger started to boil up in Silas's chest, and he forced it back down. All right, he said, his voice even. When you're ready to tell me, I'll be listening. Cora looked at him for a long moment, then picked her scissors back up. Her hands were steadier now. The next morning, Silas was out digging post holes when he heard a horse on the road. He stood up straight, wiping the sweat from his brow, and squinted into the sun's glare. It was a rider, coming slow from the direction of town. A big man on a gray horse wearing a dark coat that was way too heavy for the weather. A knot formed in Silas's gut. The rider reined in at the gate, tipping his hat. "Mornin'. You Silas Holt? Depends who's askin'. The name is Dalton, Tom Dalton, a deputy out of Helena. He resettled in his saddle. I'm hunting for a woman who vanished about 6 weeks back. Her husband is mighty worried." Silas leaned on his post-hole digger, his face a stone mask. "A lot of women out here in Montana, Mr. Dalton. This one is different. She is small, with brown hair, and might be using another name. Her husband says she is unwell, confused. He even says she could be dangerous." Silas let that hang in the hot air. "That is what the husband claims. He is a judge, as a matter of fact. Judge Edmund Ashworth from Silver Falls. A respectable man who just wants his wife home safe." Silas felt a chill run right through him. "A judge," she had whispered. "A man whose word is law." And she meant it. "Can't say I've seen anyone like that," Silas said. "But I will keep an eye out." Dalton's gaze drifted past Silas toward the house, toward the window where he prayed Cora was smart enough to stay hidden. "Much obliged," Dalton said. "You ought to know. The judge has the full legal right to bring her back. She was in a treatment facility and left without permission. That makes her a fugitive." "A fugitive," Silas echoed. "I know how that sounds, Mr. Holt. But the law is the law, especially out here." Dalton tipped his hat and rode off. Silas watched him disappear over the hill before he dropped his tool and strode to the house. Cora was in the kitchen, stiff as a board, her knuckles white as she gripped the counter. She had heard it all. "A judge," Silas said flatly. "Yes," she answered. "Judge Edmund Ashworth. And you were in a facility." Cora's chin came up. "I was locked in a building that had bars on the windows without any trial. They told me I was hysterical, a danger to myself. They said my own words proved I was sick." Her voice trembled. "Silas, that is not treatment. That is being buried alive while the law holds the shovel." He pulled a chair out and sank into it, his own hands shaking with a fury he could barely contain. He pressed them flat against the wood. "Tell me," he said. "Tell me all of it, because that man will be back and I need to know exactly what we are up against." Cora sat down. For the first time, she told him the whole story. "My real name is Anne-Marie Holloway. I married Edmund Ashworth 3 years ago. He was a circuit judge, educated and charming. Every woman in Silver Falls envied me." She let out a dry, bitter laugh. "For about 4 months, I envied myself. What happened then? I found his ledger." "What ledger?" "Edmund operates a place he calls the Ashworth Home for Wayward Women. Families pay him to take wives and daughters they find inconvenient. Women who talk back, who disobey, or who inherit money their kin wants." Silas's jaw set like granite. "And what goes on inside that place?" Cora's eyes looked far away. "Some women are given things until they lose their minds. Some are locked in rooms too small to stand up in. And some of them—" She stopped, her hand instinctively going to her left shoulder. "Some of them are marked. Marked how? Branded." The word was cold and dead, like they were cattle. A letter burned right into their skin. H for hysteric. It is so they can never deny what they are. So if they ever get away, whoever finds them knows they belong to him. The kitchen fell deathly silent. Silas stared at her, his vision blurring with tears of rage he refused to shed. "How many?" he asked, his voice thick. "When I saw the ledger, there were 43 names. 12 of them were crossed out. Gone. They did not survive his treatment. They were put in unmarked graves out back, and their families were told they died from a fever or their own weakness." Silas shot up from his chair, sending it scraping across the floor. He turned to the window, his knuckles white as he gripped the frame. He felt that blind fury building, the same fire that had gotten Emmeline killed. Silas. He did not turn. "Silas, look at me," he turned back, and Cora was standing, her eyes boring into his. "I have seen that look before," she said, her voice steady. "I saw it on Edmund. Rage will not save me. I need you to be smart, not just angry." Her words were like a splash of cold water. He closed his eyes and took a breath. "You are right," he said. "I am sorry. Do not be sorry. Be clever." He sat back down. "All right, let us be clever. That deputy said Ashworth has a commitment order. That means if they find you, they can legally take you, and no sheriff would dare stop them." "That is right. So we have to break his authority. We need to get the law on your side. And how do we do that when he is the law?" Silas scrubbed his face with his hands. "There is a lawyer in Ridgewater named Howard McClinn. He is not much, mostly handles cattle disputes, but he is honest and he despises judges." "Why?" "A judge in Billings cost his family their ranch in a land dispute 20 years ago. McClinn has been fighting the system ever since. He is the kind of man who will listen to your story and get mad enough to help. And if he cannot help, we find someone who can. But we have to start somewhere, Cora, with one honest man." She was quiet for a long time. "There is something else," she finally said. "Tell me. When I escaped, there was a fire. I did not start it. Another woman did, Ruth Beckons. She was the one who told me about the ledger and where Edmund kept it. Did she make it out?" Cora's face hardened. "I do not know. I just remember smoke and Ruth pushing me toward a window yelling, 'Run and do not ever stop.' After that, everything is a blur until you found me." "The ledger, did you get it?" "No, it was locked in his office. I only saw it that one time he left the drawer open, but I memorized all the names and dates I could." She tapped her head. "It is all in here. Every last name I could remember." "That is our weapon," Silas declared. "That is what he is truly afraid of. That is why he sent that man." Silas leaned back in his chair. "Then we had better get a move on." The next morning they rode into Ridgewater. Cora wore an old wool dress and a wide hat Silas gave her. She looked like any other rancher's wife, and nobody gave her a second glance. Except one person. Margaret Tierney, who ran the general store, was a sharp woman who noticed everything. When Silas entered with Cora, Margaret's eyes went from the heavy dress to Cora's face and back again. "Silas Holt," she said, leaning on her counter. "Since when do you bring company to town?" "Since today, Margaret." "This is Cora. She is staying out at my place. Is that a fact?" Margaret looked Cora over, not unkindly, but with an eye that missed nothing. "Honey, are you not about to faint in that thing? It has to be 102 degrees out there." Cora touched her collar. "I am fine, ma'am." "No, you are not. You are sweating through wool in July. But I guess that is your own business." Margaret then turned to Silas. "McClinn's office is just up the street, if that is what you are here for." "How did you know? You have that look on your face, the one you get right before you're about to stir up some trouble, something noble and likely foolish." She pulled a jar of lemonade out and poured 2 tall glasses. "Drink first, be stupid later." Cora held the cold glass to her forehead, closing her eyes, finding a rare moment of peace. "Margaret," Silas said in a low voice, "that deputy who came by yesterday, Dalton, he has been asking questions around town." Margaret's face went hard as a rock. "He is asking about a missing woman." Brown hair, small, confused, said her husband is eager to have her back. She glanced over at Cora. "I told him I had not seen anyone fit in that description. So did Bill. So did near everyone on this street." "Why?" Margaret set her glass down with a thud. "Because I have been married 31 years, Silas, and I know the difference between a husband who is worried and a husband who is on the hunt. The way that man talked about this woman, like she was a stray calf that wandered off, it made my skin crawl." Cora stared at Margaret, her eyes starting to fill up. "Now, do not you cry in my store, honey," Margaret said, but her voice was gentle. "You save those tears for when they can do some real good." Silas gave Cora's shoulder a quick, light squeeze, and she did not flinch. He noticed. She noticed him seeing it. Not a word passed between them. They walked on up the street to Howard Mullen's office. It was a tight room above the feed store, just crammed with books and papers and smelling of old tobacco. Mullen himself was a thin man, likely in his 60s, with a white beard and wire spectacles. He had the look of a man who had been angry for so long, it had become a permanent part of his face. "Silas, sit down. Who is this?" "This is Cora. She needs a lawyer." "I'm not a very good one." "You are an honest one. That is better." Mullen peered at Cora over his glasses. "What sort of trouble are you in, miss?" Cora sat bolt upright in the chair, her hands clenched tight in her lap. The kind that comes with a judge's signature on it. Mullen's eyebrows shot up. "Go on," he told her. She told him. Not everything, not the brand or the worst of it, but enough. The marriage, the commitment, the escape, and the deputy asking questions. Mullen just listened. When she finished, he took off his spectacles and cleaned them real slow. "Judge Edmund Ashworth," he said. "Silver Falls. You know him?" Silas asked. "I know of him. He has got a reputation that stretches from Helena all the way to the territorial capital. A respected man, connected. The kind of fellow who gets invited to have dinner with the governor. The kind of man nobody would believe is a monster," Cora said. "The kind of man," Mullen said, putting his spectacles back on, "who is very difficult to fight in a courtroom. You have to understand that, miss. If we challenge this order, we are not just fighting a piece of paper. We are fighting his word. And in this territory, a judge's word is worth more than gold." "So, it is hopeless," Cora said, her voice gone flat again. "I did not say that." Mullen leaned forward. "I said it was difficult. There is a difference. You said there were other women in that place. 43 that I know of, and some of them are still alive. I believe so, at least a few. Then we do not just need your testimony, we need theirs. One woman accusing a judge is a scandal that gets swept under the rug. 5 women. 10 of them. That is a storm no man can outrun, not even a judge." Silas looked at Cora. She was sitting perfectly still. But something in her eyes had changed. A light, small but fierce. "How do we find them?" she asked. "The names you memorized," Mullen said. "We will start there. Families, hometowns. If these women were sent to Ashworth's facility, somebody paid for it. There are records, bank drafts, letters. The kind of paper trail that does not disappear just because a man wants it to." "And the ledger?" Silas asked. "If the ledger is still there, that is everything. That has names, dates, admissions, and deaths. That is a hanging offense if those deaths can be proven." Mullen paused. "But getting that ledger means getting into Ashworth's facility. And that, my friends, is not a legal matter. That is a very dangerous one." The 3 of them sat in that cramped office, the heat pressing in. The clock on the wall ticked. "I am not asking you to get the ledger," Cora said to Silas. "I am not asking you to fight Edmund. I am asking you to help me stand up in a room full of people and just tell the truth. That is all I have ever wanted, just to be believed." Silas looked at her, at the wool dress she wore in the summer heat, at the woman who had survived Brandon, prison, and a 100-mile walk through the wilderness, and who still said please and thank you. "You will be believed," he said. "I will make damn sure of it." They worked until the sun went down. Cora recited from memory 12 names of women she had held on to in her mind, 12 stories she carried with her like prayers. Mullen wrote each one down, building a case, one beam at a time. When they left the office, the street was dark and quiet. Silas helped Cora onto his horse, Drummer, and got on behind her. He could feel how tired she was in the way she leaned back against him. "You did good today," he said. "I just talked, that is all. Talking was the bravest thing you have done since I found you on that road." She was quiet for a long time as the stars came out. "Silas." "Yeah. The new dress. I think I will finish it tomorrow." "That is good." "And then I think," her voice caught. "I think I would like to take this one off for good. I think I am ready." He tightened his arm around her just a little. "Then I will build a fire." "What for?" "Because some things are not worth keeping, Cora, and some things deserve to burn." She did not answer, but she put her hand over his where it rested on her waist, and she held on. They rode home through the warm Montana night, two people moving forward together toward whatever was coming. Because something was coming. Judge Edmund Ashworth was a patient man, a methodical man. When Tom Dalton rode back to Silver Falls with nothing to report, the judge would not just let it go. He would come himself, and when he did, he would bring the full weight of his authority, his reputation, and his fury. Cora knew it. Silas knew it. Even old Malin, sitting alone with 12 names on a piece of paper, knew it. The question was not whether the storm would come. The question was whether they would be ready when it hit. Cora finished the dress before dawn. Silas found her at the kitchen table, the blue cotton spread out on her lap. She bit the thread, tied it off, and held the dress up in the lamplight. Her hands were steady. Her eyes were not. "It is done," she said. Silas put down the coffee pot. "It is a fine dress. It is a plain dress, but it is mine." She pressed it to her chest. "Nobody chose it for me. Nobody forced it on me. I cut it. I sewed it. It is mine." "Yes, ma'am, it is." She stood up and looked at him. "I need you to go outside." "I know. And I need you to build that fire." He nodded. He went out to the yard and built a fire pit with stones and dry wood. The air was warm even before sunrise. He struck a match. The kindling caught and flames began to climb. He waited. The screen door creaked. Cora walked out wearing the blue dress. It fit her well. She looked different. Not reborn, that is a word for fairy tales. She looked like a woman who had made a decision and was standing right inside of it. In her arms, she carried the old wool dress, folded neat and heavy, dark as a bruise. She walked to the fire and stopped. Her hands balled up the fabric, her jaw set hard as stone. He could see the war raging in her eyes. "You don't have to do this right now," he said, his voice low. "Yes, I do," she shot back. "If I wait, I'll never do it." She took a deep, steadying breath. "I'm done wearing his shame, Silas." With that, she tossed the dress into the fire. The wool smoldered, smelling of old fear and sweat. Cora just stood there, still as a statue, and watched it burn. When only ash was left, she turned to him. "I thought I'd feel free," her voice hitched. "I just feel bare." Silas took off his hat, holding it in both hands. "That feeling will pass, Cora. I burned Emmeline's things, too. For a whole week, it felt like I'd lost her all over again. Then one morning I woke up and the weight was just gone." She stared at the dying embers. "I want that morning. It's coming. You just have to let it," he answered. She gave a small nod and walked back to the house. Silas stayed by the fire until the last spark went dark. Then he buried the ashes and didn't look back. A few days later, word came from Malin. He had found 2 women from Cora's list who had made it out of Ashworth's facility alive. He'd sent letters to them, careful-like, asking questions. Cora threw herself into work fixing fences and hauling water. She organized the barn with a perfection that made Silas uneasy. It was the kind of busy work folks do when they're trying to outrun their own thoughts. "You're gonna run yourself ragged," he told her. "Good," she said, dropping a heavy bale of hay. "Maybe then I'll sleep." "You ain't sleeping," he said plainly. She went still. "It's the same dream every night," she finally whispered, burying her face in her hands. "Edmund's standing over me with the brand. I can feel the heat, but when I try to scream, nothing comes out. It's like he stole my voice, too." Silas sat down beside her, not too close, but close enough. "That man didn't take your voice, Cora. He just made you forget you had it. You've got it back now." Her eyes, wet and fierce, looked up at him. "What if it ain't enough? What if I tell the truth and they just call me—" The ugly word hung in the air. "A hysterical woman." Silas turned to face her square. "Listen to me. You memorized 43 names. You walked 100 miles in that wool dress in the dead of summer. You are the least hysterical person I have ever met." He paused. "And I have known some mighty calm horses." She stared at him for a long moment, then a real laugh broke out of her, ragged and surprised. "Did you just compare me to a horse?" "Compared you favorably to one. There's a difference." She laughed again, and something inside Silas's chest shifted that hadn't moved in years. He had to look away. "Silas?" "Yeah." "Thank you for not treating me like I'm made of glass. Everyone else does." He put his hat back on. "Well, to be fair, Drummer is a very impressive horse. Get out of this barn." As he reached the door, she called his name. "Silas. When he comes, don't let me break." He looked back at her. "You ain't gonna break, Cora. That man doesn't stand a chance." He believed every word, but Silas was scared. Not of Ashworth, but of how much he cared, because caring always meant you had something to lose. 4 days later, Margaret Tierney rode out to the ranch, and she wasn't there for a social call. "Get inside," she ordered before her feet even hit the ground. "Both of you." In the kitchen, she got straight to the point. "Judge Ashworth is in Ridgewater. He arrived this morning on the stagecoach with 2 other men. One is a U.S. Marshal named Greer, the other is a doctor." Cora's face lost all its color. "A doctor?" "Dr. Parnell Webb," Margaret said with a sneer. "Ashworth is calling him a specialist in female disorders. He has papers, Silas. A commitment order with a territorial stamp for the return of one Anne-Marie Holloway Ashworth, claiming she's a danger to herself and others." Cora gripped the edge of the table. "He has a warrant. He has a warrant, a marshal, and a doctor ready to swear you're insane," Margaret confirmed. "He thinks he's covered every angle." "Where is he now?" Silas asked. "At the hotel. He's not here to negotiate, Silas. He's here to collect." Cora walked to the window, wrapping her arms around herself. "He brought Webb," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Dr. Webb. He was the one who administered the treatments." She turned around, her face a calm, terrifying mask. Her eyes were not. "He's the one who held the brand." The kitchen went dead silent. Silas's hands curled into fists under the table. "Then the fool just brought a witness against himself," Silas said, his voice flat and cold. "He's too arrogant to see it. Witness, he's armed. Webb is just Edmund's puppet. He'll look me over, say I am not right in the head, and sign the papers. They will say I have to go back to that place for my own good. The marshal will take me away, all legal and quiet, and I will just vanish." "That is not going to happen," Silas said, his voice low. "How?" "Tell me how, Silas. He has the law on his side. He is the law. Then we will break it." "No." Cora shook her head, moving back to the table. "That is what got Emmeline killed. That is you busting Virgil's jaw in his own store. That is anger, Silas, not justice. If we use our fists, we lose. He plays the victim, and I become the crazy woman he claims I am." Silas just stared, hating that she was right. Margaret cleared her throat. "The girl has a point, but she has something Ashworth ain't counting on." "What is that?" "Me." Margaret stood a little taller. "And a dozen other women in this town who knew that man was rotten from the second he started talking. Honey, he came into my store this morning asking about a confused woman. I told him I had not seen anyone like that. He gave me a smile I have seen on men who think a woman is just part of the furniture. He said, 'Women in distress can be mighty convincing, ma'am. It is their nature.' He said that to me in my own place. 'What did you do?' Cora asked. I smiled right back and said I hoped he found what he was looking for. Then I sent Bill to every woman on Main Street to tell them what that man said. And honey, there's not a one of them who will help Edmund Ashworth find his missing property, because that is what he called you. His property." Cora squeezed her eyes shut. "He always had." Silas stood up. "Margaret, how much time do we have?" "The sheriff said he needed a day to get a search together. That gives us until tomorrow afternoon. That is not enough time. It is all we have got. We need Millen. I already sent for him. He will be here by evening." Silas looked at Cora. She stood tall in that blue dress, her hands steady. She was scared, but she looked ready. "What do you need me to do?" he asked her. I need you to do something harder than fighting. Just name it. I need you to let me be the one to face him, not standing behind you. I need to look Edmund Ashworth in the eye and show him, I am not scared anymore. She took a breath. Even though I truly am. That is the bravest thing I have heard you say. It is the most frightening thing I have ever said. There is a difference. Malin showed up right as the sun went down, carrying a satchel of papers and a bottle of whiskey. "I heard back from my contact," he said, laying documents on the table. "The woman's name is Helen Cartwright. She was in Ashworth's facility for 14 months, and she confirms everything. The drugs, the brandings, all of it. She is willing to speak on it." Cora covered her mouth. "Helen. She was in the room right next to mine. I heard her crying every single night. She is alive, Cora, and she wants to fight back." "One witness," Silas said. "Emlyn, you told us we would need 5, maybe 10. I said that would guarantee it." "But one person to back up your story is enough to challenge his order. It is enough to get a formal hearing. And if we get a hearing, Ashworth has to show his records. The minute he opens those books, he is finished." Cora whispered, "If those books show what you say they show?" "Yes, he is done." "But the hearing would be with another judge," Silas argued. "A judge who probably owes Ashworth a favor." Malin gave a sharp little smile. "Not if we ask for a federal hearing. Ashworth is a territorial judge. His power stops at the line. If we can show he broke federal laws, like false imprisonment, we can get it moved out of his friend's hands." "How long will that take?" Cora asked. "Weeks, months maybe. I do not have months. He is here now. I know. That is why we have to slow him down. We need to make such a fuss that he cannot just make you disappear. We need the whole town to see." "The women," Margaret said from the doorway. She had been listening. "The women of Ridgewater. They are not lawyers, but they are mothers and wives, and they know the look of a man who has come to claim a woman who does not want to be claimed." "What are you suggesting?" Malin asked. "I am suggesting that tomorrow, when Judge Ashworth walks down Main Street, he finds every woman in this town standing there, not yelling, not blocking him, just watching him, being seen. That will not stop him legally," Malin said. "No, but it will make him slow down. A man like that cares more about his reputation than anything. If the women are all watching, he has to put on a show. He has to be the reasonable man. And every second he wastes on that performance is a second we can use." Cora looked at Margaret. "You would do that for me? You barely know me." Margaret put her hands on Cora's shoulders. "Honey, I do not need to know your whole story. I see a woman who wore a winter dress for 3 years in the heat of July so no one would see what a man did to her. I know enough." Cora's control finally broke. It cracked like river ice, slow at first, then all at once. She buried her face in Margaret's shoulder and cried. Not quiet tears, but deep, shaking sobs. Margaret just held her tight and let her cry it all out. Silas had to step outside onto the porch. He gripped the railing and stared up at the stars that did not care about any of this. He could hear Cora's crying through the wall, and each sob felt like a punch. Malin came out to stand next to him. "You love her," Malin said flatly. "It was not a question. What I feel does not matter right now. It matters because it will make you do something foolish, and I need you to be smart. I am smart. You are the man who beat a shopkeeper nearly to death for what he did to your sister. I know that story, Silas. Everyone in this town does. That kind of anger does not just leave. It waits." Silas turned to him. "I know what I did wrong with Emmeline. I went in swinging and came out with nothing but blood on my knuckles and a sister in the grave. I will not make that mistake again. Even when Ashworth is standing right in front of you? Even when he calls her his property or gives you that smile Margaret mentioned? Even then?" Mamlin's jaw was tight. Even then, good, because tomorrow we do not need a fighter. We need a man who can stand perfectly still and trust the law to work. And if the law does not work? Mamlin put a hand on his shoulder. Then God help us. But we have to try the right way first. We owe her that much. Inside, the crying had stopped. Silas could hear Margaret's low voice and Cora's quiet answer, her voice raw but steady. He looked at Mellin. First thing in the morning, you file that paper. Already wrote it. I will ride for Helena at first light. And Cora? She stays with Margaret in town. It is not safe here. If Ashworth sends someone to the ranch, you can honestly tell them she is gone. It buys us time. She's not going to like that. She does not have to like it. She just has to live through it. Silas nodded and went back inside. Cora was at the table, her eyes red and swollen, holding a cup of coffee. Margaret stood behind her like a guard. Cora, Silas began. Tomorrow, you will stay with Margaret. No, it is not safe here. Nowhere is safe. At least here I am not hiding. You are not hiding. You are getting into position. There is a difference. Cora looked up at him. You sound like a lawyer, God forbid. He sat down across from her. Just listen. Mylin is going to Helena to file for a federal hearing. That is our best shot, but it will take time. We have to keep you somewhere public, somewhere Ashworth cannot get to you quietly. Margaret's store is right on Main Street. If he tries anything there, the whole town will see. And if the town does not care? Margaret spoke up. They will care. I will make sure of it. Cora looked between them, then closed her eyes and gave a small nod. All right. I will go. She opened her eyes and fixed them on Silas. But when he comes to that store, I will not be in the back room. I am going to be standing right at that counter, looking him square in the eye. I would expect nothing less. And Silas? Yeah, when this is all over, no matter how it... I need you to know something, Cora said later that evening, her voice quiet but steady. The night you sat on the floor outside my door, that was the first time in 3 years I felt like a human being. Not a patient, not a wife, just a person. You gave that back to me. The room was still. Silas met her gaze, feeling every wall he'd built since Emmeline's death start to tremble. Nothing's going to happen to you, he said, his voice rough. Not while I'm drawing breath. Don't promise me that. Too late, he said. She offered the ghost of a smile. Tomorrow, Edmund Ashworth would come. And Cora, the woman with a dozen names in her head and a brand on her shoulder, would be waiting for him. Not running, not hiding, and not wearing his dress. At 9:30 in the morning, Judge Ashworth walked down Main Street like he owned the whole territory. Marshal Greer was on his left, Dr. Parnell Webb on his right. Then Ashworth came to a halt. Every woman in Ridgewater was standing on that street. They weren't in a line, not blocking the road, just there. On porches and doorways, leaning on posts with their arms crossed, watching him. Silent. Margaret Tierney stood in front of her store. Next to her, old Mrs. Harlan sat in a chair she'd dragged from her kitchen, knitting and looking at the judge like he was a stain on her good tablecloth. Ashworth tipped his hat. Good morning, ma'am. It was, Margaret replied. He looked past her. I'm looking for my wife. A small woman, not well. Possibly dangerous. So your deputy told us, Margaret said. And yet no one seems to have seen her. That strikes me as unusual. What strikes me as unusual, Judge, is a man who travels 300 miles with a marshal and a doctor just to collect a wife. Most men would just write a letter. Ashworth's smile tightened up a bit. My wife is ill, Mrs. Tierney. She needs treatment. Surely you can understand a husband's concern. I can understand a great many things. The two of them held each other's gaze. The street was quiet except for a sign creaking in the hot breeze. Then Ashworth turned to the sheriff. Sheriff Boone. I have a valid commitment order. I would like to begin a formal search of the town. Boone shifted his weight. He was a thick man with a gray mustache and the look of someone who would rather be settling fence disputes. Judge, I have got no reason to think the woman you are looking for is here. Then a search should be quick and painless. And if the people in this town do not want their homes searched, my warrant permits it. In Silver Falls. This here is not Silver Falls. Ashworth's smile vanished. Sheriff, are you telling me you intend to obstruct me? I am telling you I intend to do my job, which is keeping the peace in my town. And right now, the peace in my town is being disturbed by you three. Strangers who showed up wanting to search folks' homes for a woman no one had seen. Boone stood a little taller. He was afraid. Cora could see it all the way from inside Margaret's store where she watched from the window. Boone was scared, but he was not backing down. I will need to confirm that warrant with the territorial office, Boone said. That might take a day or two. A day or two is not acceptable. It is the law, Judge. Even way out here. Ashworth stared Boone down for a long, hard moment. Then, very slowly, he turned his head and looked right at the store window, right at Cora. Their eyes locked. Cora felt the world drop away. Every part of her screamed to run, to hide, to disappear. That old terror rose in her throat like a flood, but she did not move. She stood there in her new blue dress behind Margaret's counter, and she stared right back at the man who had burned his mark on her. She held his gaze. Her hands were shaking so bad she had to press them flat on the countertop, but she held his gaze. Ashworth gave her a slow, knowing smile. Then he turned back to the sheriff. Go on and take your time, Sheriff Boone. I am a patient man. With that, he turned and headed back to the hotel, his men right behind him. The women on the street held their breath until the door swung shut. Margaret rushed inside. Are you all right? No. Cora's voice was barely a whisper, but I am still standing. He saw me, Margaret. He knows. Of course he knows, honey. He knew who you were before he ever stepped off that stagecoach. That whole show was for you, to make you afraid. And it worked, did it not? From where I was standing, it looked like a man who figured his wife would fold like a cheap shirt, but watched her stand tall instead. That shook him, Cora. I saw it. You saw what you wanted to believe. I saw a judge who just found out his property grew a backbone. Just then Silas came in, his face set like stone. I was across the street. I saw it all. Then you saw me trembling like a leaf in the wind. No, I saw you hold your ground. That is what I saw. Silas, he is coming for me. He is. Tonight or tomorrow, he will not wait on Boone. He will find another way. Malin is already on the road to Helena. If he rides hard, he will be there by morning. He will file that federal petition, and Ashworth's warrant will be nothing but paper. Until then, you stay right here. You stay where folks can see you, and you do not let that man see you flinch again. I did not flinch. No, ma'am, you surely did not. A couple of hours later, Dr. Parnell Webb strolled into Margaret's store all by himself. He was a skinny fellow with thin hair and pale, watery eyes that made you uneasy. He picked up a tin of crackers, looked it over, and set it back down. Afternoon, Margaret said from her spot behind the counter. Can I help you with something? Just looking. He gave a practiced smile that was meant to be friendly but just felt cold. His gaze landed on Cora, who was stacking jars near the back. My, he said, that is a lovely dress on you. Cora's hands froze, but she did not turn around. Blue is your color, Webb went on. Much nicer than the gray, though I suppose that old gray was practical. Cora finally turned and met his gaze. In his watery eyes she saw it all. He remembered her. He was amused by her fear, and he was certain he still owned it. I do not believe we have met, Cora said, her voice steady as a rock. Oh, I think we have. Patients can be forgetful, you see. It is just a symptom of the condition. Margaret stepped up. I think it is time for you to leave my store. I am a customer, ma'am. No, you are not. You are a man who came here to scare a woman who works for me, and I will not have it. Webb's smile never faded. He pulled a folded paper from his coat and laid it on the counter. "This is a medical evaluation order signed by Judge Ashworth. It says the woman known as Anne-Marie Holloway Ashworth must submit to an examination. Refusing to do so is proof of her condition." Margaret did not even look at the paper. "Get out. I said get out of my store." Webb gave Cora one last look. "The examination is going to happen, Anne-Marie. Sooner or later, it will happen. And we both know what I will find." He leaned in, his voice a low hiss. "We both remember, do we not?" And just like that, something inside Cora snapped. Not with fear, but with a hot, sharp anger. "I remember everything, Doctor," she said, her voice quiet, but hard as iron. "I remember the smell of the brand heating in the fire. I remember you holding my shoulder while it burned into my skin. I remember the names of 12 women who died under your care. And I remember your ledger. Page 47. A patient named Ruth Beckons. Treatment, you wrote, was prolonged submersion. Outcome, you wrote, was expired." Cora took a step closer. "You wrote expired like she was a carton of milk." The color drained from Webb's face. "So yes, Doctor, I remember. The real question is, are you ready for everyone else to remember it too?" Webb snatched the paper off the counter and hurried out the door, nearly running back to the hotel. Margaret let out a long breath. "Lord have mercy." "He is scared," Cora said, her voice steady even though she was shaking. Edmund promised him this would be quiet. "Just come in, get the patient, and go home." "But it is not quiet anymore." "No, it is not," Silas said, coming in from the back room where he had heard everything. "Cora, that business about the ledger, page 47. I memorized every single page I could. How many pages did you see?" 16. Edmund left the drawer unlocked one night. I had maybe 20 minutes, and I burned every last word into my mind. 16 pages of names and dates. 16 pages of evidence. If Malin gets that hearing, and if I can recite what I saw, a federal judge will have to investigate. The records will either prove I am telling the truth or they will not. And if Edmund got rid of the ledger, well, that is a crime all its own. Silas just stared at her. "You have been planning this." "For 3 years," she said. "Every single night I was not just remembering, Silas, I was building my case." That afternoon, the fight turned from threats to paper. Marshal Greer showed up with another warrant from Ashworth himself, ordering Cora into Dr. Webb's custody immediately. Greer was a tall man who looked tired of his own job. "Ma'am, I have to serve this paper," he said to Cora. "I understand you can come along quietly, or I am authorized to—" "To what?" Silas stepped in. "Drag her out of here in front of the whole town?" "Mr. Holt, I do not want any trouble." "Then do not come looking for it." Just then, Sheriff Boone rushed in the doorway, out of breath. "Greer, you hold on. I just got a wire from Helena." Everybody froze. Boone held up the telegram. "The federal court in Helena has received a petition challenging the commitment order. Until they review it, all local enforcement actions are stopped." Greer just blinked. "Stopped? That means your warrant is not worth the paper it is printed on. Not until a federal judge says otherwise. Judge Ashworth will not stand for that. Judge Ashworth does not have a choice in the matter. Federal law trumps territorial law. It is in the Constitution, Marshal." Cora sank into a chair, her legs suddenly weak. She covered her face with her hands and took a deep, shaky breath, feeling a knot in her chest that had been there for 3 long years finally start to loosen. Silas placed a hand on her shoulder. "It is not over," she whispered. "No," he said. "But the game has changed. He is not the only one with papers anymore." A few minutes later, a loud crash came from the hotel across the street. It was the sound of glass, or maybe just the composure of a man who had never been told no in his entire life. Margaret poured 4 glasses of whiskey. "I would say this calls for a drink." "It calls for 10, Boone said, "but I will settle for 1. But Edmund is not the kind of man to just leave Ridgewater. He will wait for his moment. He will find a way to twist the truth and discredit me before any hearing. He will paint me as a dangerous woman and plant stories to turn folks against me." "Let him try," Margaret said. "The women in this town have already picked their side." Not all of them, Cora replied. Edmund is a smooth talker. He will buy rounds at the saloon and shake hands after church. He will spin a sad yarn about his poor sick wife and the cowboy who led her astray. And people will believe him, because it is always easier to believe a powerful judge than a woman with scars. The room fell silent, because they all knew she was speaking the gospel truth. Silas set his glass down hard. Then we do not wait for the hearing. We bring the fight to him. How? Mlyn asked. We need more witnesses, Cora said. Not just Helen Cartwright. We need the other women, the ones whose families sent them to Ashworth's so-called facility. I want to find them. I want to bring every woman who survived that place, every family who lost someone, right here to Ridgewater. I want a line of witnesses so long that Edmund Ashworth chokes on their truth. That could take weeks. Then I had better ride fast. Cora stood up and walked right over to Silas. She put her hands on his chest, a gesture so bold and surprising it made him go completely still. Come back, she said, her voice low. I always come back. Your sister never got the chance to say that to you. I am saying it now. Come back, Silas. He covered her hands with his own. I will come back, Cora. That is one promise I will not break. She held his gaze for a long moment, then stepped away and turned to Margaret. While he is gone, we have our own work to do. What kind of work? The kind that makes a crooked judge lose sleep. I have 16 pages of that ledger memorized. I'm going to write down every last word, every name, every date, and every wicked thing that happened. Then we are going to send copies to every newspaper within 200 miles. Margaret broke into a wide grin. Now you are talking. That evening, Silas rode out with a list of names tucked in his pocket, chasing 6 chances to build a wall of truth so high that no man's reputation could climb over it. Cora watched him go from the porch, watched until the dust settled and the road was empty again. She did not cry. She just turned, sat at the kitchen table, and picked up her pen. She took a breath, and then she began to write. Page 1. Patient Mary Ellen Cook, brought in on September 14th, 1862. Reason, hysteria. Treatment, forced sedation. Outcome, transferred. Page 2. Patient Louise Dennison, brought in on January 3rd, 1863. Reason, moral insanity. Treatment, isolation. Outcome, expired. The pen kept moving. The names poured out onto the page. And somewhere on a dark road heading north, a man on a good horse rode hard, carrying that list of the dead and the nearly dead, racing against a judge who had never lost a thing and was not about to start. Silas returned on the 8th day. He rode into Ridgewater looking thinner and darker from the sun. But he was not alone. 4 women followed him. Cora was at the counter when she heard the horses. She looked up and saw Silas sitting tall in the saddle. Behind him was a wagon, driven by a stout woman with steel gray hair. Beside it, 2 more women on horseback. And sitting in the wagon bed, a small woman with hollow cheeks and eyes that Cora knew instantly. Cora dropped the pen. She was out that door before Margaret could even ask. Helen. Helen Cartwright climbed down from that wagon, looking smaller and older than Cora remembered. Her hands shook, but when she saw Cora standing there, her whole face broke open. Anne-Marie, Helen's voice cracked. You are alive. I am alive. I thought in the fire. I thought you did not make it. I made it out because of Ruth. She shoved me through the window. Helen's eyes flooded with tears. Ruth did not get out. I know. They just held each other right there in the dusty street. 2 women who had survived the same hell. That sound Helen made, a low cry of pure grief, brought other women to their porches. Silas swung down from his horse. He looked over at Cora, his eyes tired but relieved. And something else, too. Something urgent. We need to talk, he said. Inside, around the small kitchen table, Silas introduced them. There was Helen and Agnes Dooley, the stout woman who had lost her daughter in that place. There was Sarah Jane Mitchum, whose own husband sent her away to steal her inheritance, and Clara Noonan, who had escaped 2 years before Cora. Every single one of them has a story, Silas said, and every one of them is willing to tell it. To who? Cora asked. The hearing has not even been scheduled. Oh, it has now. Silas pulled a folded paper from his coat. A federal judge named Harlan Pierce is arriving in Ridgewater in 3 days. He is here to review your commitment and hear testimony. 3 days. Cora sank into a chair. Edmund will try to stop this. He is already trying, Silas said, looking at Margaret. The judge has been mighty busy, buying drinks and poisoning the well against you all over town. That man Ashworth was spreading his poison all over town. He put $50 in the church offering plate and played the part of a grieving husband. He told folks his poor wife was trapped by a violent rancher, meaning you, and that he just wanted her home safe. A few fell for it. Bill Turner down at the saloon called you trouble, and the Reverend Polk seemed convinced. Some ranchers were saying you were hiding a fugitive. Margaret told Cora, but she just shook her head. The women here are not swayed by a man who buys his good name. Not one. Cora looked over at Helen, who sat staring at the table. Helen, can you face him? Can you tell a judge what he did? Helen finally looked up, her eyes wet but full of fire. I have been silent for 6 long years, Anne-Marie. She pushed up her sleeve, showing a terrible jagged scar shaped like the letter H. 6 years of wearing long sleeves in the heat. I am done being quiet. Then young Clara Noonan, with her fiery red hair, found her voice. And her. He told my family I was trying to hurt myself. That is why they sent me to him. But I was not. I only told my father I would not marry the man he chose for me. That was my only crime. Agnes Dooley, the oldest and angriest of them all, slammed her hand on the table. My daughter was only 19. Her husband claimed she was difficult. Ashworth took her, and I never saw my girl again. He sent me a letter saying she died from a fever. Then he sent a bill for her burial. He charged me to bury my own child in an unmarked hole, like she was an animal. The room went dead silent. Cora reached out and took Agnes's hand. We will make them all remember her name. Agnes nodded fiercely. You are damn right we will. The 3 days leading up to the hearing felt like a lifetime. Edmund Ashworth was busy. On day 1, his marshal tried to argue that Judge Pierce had no right to hear the case. Mlynn shut that down in a matter of hours, citing federal law. The objection was thrown out. On the 2nd day, Dr. Webb cornered Helen Cartwright on the street. Margaret told Cora what happened. He walked up to her, smooth as a snake, and said he remembered her. He whispered a threat, asking if she really wanted everyone to know the things she said and did in his facility. He bragged about having detailed records of her outbursts. But Helen did not flinch. She looked him right in the eye and said, I only had to be restrained because I was trying to stop you from hurting the woman in the next room. Her name was Ruth Beckons, and she is dead because of you. Then she turned and walked away. Cora felt a small bit of hope. He is trying to break them, she thought, and he is failing. On the morning of the hearing, Ashworth made his last desperate move. Silas was loading the wagon when he saw a horse riding hard toward the ranch. He grabbed his rifle. It was Sheriff Boone, looking pale and worried. Silas, we have a big problem. What is it? Ashworth filed a criminal complaint against you this morning. Assault and kidnapping. He has got a statement from Webb saying you manipulated a mentally unwell person. Silas could not believe it. You have to be kidding me. I wish I was, the sheriff said. He has a warrant for your arrest. If you ride into town, they will take you. The hearing is today, Silas said, realizing the plan. He is not trying to win. He is just trying to keep me from being there. Without me, Cora is alone. She is not alone, Boone said. But she needs me there. If you go, you will be in a jail cell before you even see the courthouse. Silas gripped the porch rail, fighting down a wave of pure rage. There is another way into town, he said. There is a back road that comes in past the mill. If I ride in from the east, I can get to the courthouse from behind. And if they see me, then I will be the best-dressed man in the Montana jail. Silas looked at the sheriff. "Are you going to stop me?" Sheriff Boone looked at him for a long moment, then turned his horse. "I did not see you this morning, Silas. I rode out here, and nobody was home. Thank you, Sheriff. Do not make me regret this." Silas took the back road and slipped into the courthouse through a rear door where Mlyn was waiting. "I heard the news," Mlyn said. "We will deal with your warrant later. Just get inside and sit down quietly." The hearing room was packed. The women of Ridgewater filled one side. On the other sat Edmund Ashworth with his doctor and his marshal, looking like a concerned husband. Behind them were the few men who had believed his lies. Judge Harlan Pierce sat at the front, an old man with eyes that saw everything. He looked like he had spent his life listening to liars and had gotten real good at finding the truth. "This hearing," he announced, "is to review the commitment of Anne-Marie Holloway Ashworth." Cora stood up wearing a simple blue dress. "I am here, Your Honor." Mlyn stood beside her, his old suit smelling of tobacco. "Your Honor, my client was sent to the Ashworth home without a trial, without a doctor's exam, and without her permission. She was held for 11 months. During that time, she was drugged, tied down, and branded with a hot iron by Dr. Parnell Webb, on the direct order of her own husband." A shocked murmur filled the room. The judge raised a hand for silence. "Those are some very serious claims, Mr. Mlyn." "They are, Your Honor, and we have witnesses to prove every word." Cora went first. She told her story clearly and calmly from the very beginning. She spoke of her wedding, the first time Edmund hit her, and the ledger book she found in his desk. She described being taken in the night to a room with no windows, and she told them about the branding. When she finished, several women in the room were crying softly. Agnes Dooley wept without shame. Through it all, Ashworth sat perfectly still, watching his wife with the calm confidence of a man who believed his word was law. Then Helen spoke, showing the judge the ugly H-shaped scar on her arm. Clara Noonan spoke next, then Sarah Jane Mitchum. One by one, they stood and shared their terrible stories. Agnes was the last to speak. She did not have scars to show. She only had a name. "My girl's name was Lily," she said, her voice trembling. "Lily Ann Dooley. She was 19 years old. She loved to sing even though she could not carry a tune. Judge Ashworth told me she died of a fever. He charged me $12 to bury her. I paid it. I paid to have my own daughter buried in a hole I will never even find." The room was heavy with silence. Ashworth's lawyer stood up. "Your Honor, these are sad stories, but there is no proof. There are no records." "Oh, there are records," Cora said, her voice ringing through the room. Everyone turned to look at her. "There is a ledger. It is in a locked drawer in Judge Ashworth's office. I saw 16 pages. I memorized them. I saw names, dates, and 12 entries that were marked expired. 12 dead women. That is just hearsay," the lawyer snapped. "Then open the drawer," Cora challenged. "If I am lying, the book will prove it." "Your ledger will not match. If I'm telling the truth, it will." Pierce looked at Ashworth. "Judge Ashworth, does such a ledger exist?" For the first time, Ashworth's cool demeanor cracked. It was just a flicker, a tightening around his eyes, but they all saw it. "The facility keeps standard medical records," Ashworth said carefully, "as required by law." "Then you will not object to a federal inspection of those records." A silence stretched just a moment too long. "Of course not." "Then I am ordering one. Federal marshals will go to the Ashworth home within 7 days." Judge Pierce put his spectacles back on. "In the meantime, the commitment order for Anne-Marie Holloway Ashworth is vacated. She is a free citizen with all her legal rights. Any attempt to hold her will be considered kidnapping." Cora's knees went weak, and Mlyn had to steady her. "Furthermore," Pierce continued, looking right at Ashworth, "the criminal complaint against Silas Hole is dismissed since it was filed under an order that no longer exists by a judge whose authority is now under federal review." Ashworth shot to his feet. Your Honor, this is an outrage. Sit down, Judge Ashworth. You are not on the bench today. You are a guest in my courtroom. And in my courtroom, you will sit when I am speaking. Ashworth sat, his face as pale as a sheet. Pierce stood. This hearing is adjourned. Mrs. Ashworth, you are free to go. The room erupted. The women of Ridgewater rushed forward, and Margaret reached Cora first, hugging her so tight she could hardly breathe. Helen was next, then Clara, then Agnes, who held Cora's face in her hands and whispered, "You did it. You did it for my Lily." Cora just nodded, tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling. Through the crowd, she saw Silas by the back wall, hat in his hands, his eyes shining. He did not push through the crowd. He did not have to. He just stood there, steady as he had been from the first day. The crowd parted as she walked to him. "You came back," she said softly. "I told you I would. You are wanted for kidnapping. Not anymore." She laughed, a real, true sound. She put her hands on his chest, just like before, and felt his heart beating strong beneath her palms. "Silas Hole," she said, "you are the most stubborn, infuriating, and patient man I have ever met." "Yes, ma'am. I am not finished." "Sorry." "You rode across all of Montana to bring 4 strangers to fight for a woman you found half dead in the dirt." Her voice trembled. "Why?" He looked straight into her eyes. "Because you deserved someone who stayed." She kissed him. Right there in the courthouse, in front of Margaret and Malin and half the town. She kissed him, and he kissed her back, and the whole room went quiet for a second before it burst into applause. 3 weeks later, the federal marshals came back from the Ashworth home with the ledger. Every single page matched Cora's memory. Every name, every date, every terrible outcome. They arrested Edmund Ashworth in his hotel room, still wearing his fine suit, still insisting he was an innocent man. Parnell Webb was arrested that very same day, and his whole operation was shut down. 14 women were finally set free. Malin found himself with more cases than he knew what to do with. The Bridgewater Gazette put Cora's story right on the front page, and soon, papers all across the territory were telling it. Letters started pouring in from women who had been silenced for years, women who read Cora's words and finally found the courage to believe their own. One evening in late August, Silas and Cora stood on the porch of the ranch house. A cool breeze was finally blowing through the valley. "Malin says the trial will be in Helena," Cora said. "He wants me to testify." "Will you?" she asked. "Every time they ask me. For Ruth, for Lily, for every single woman in that ledger." Silas nodded and took her hand. "Cora, you never did tell me about that blue dress, but why always the blue?" Silas asked, his voice soft. She smoothed the simple cotton dress, one she'd stitched together in a dim kitchen what felt like a whole other life ago. "Back in that room, the one with no windows," she said quietly. "I'd shut my eyes and try my hardest to remember the morning sky. That pale, soft blue right before the sun gets too strong." She looked up at him. "I made a promise to myself that if I ever got out, I'd wear that color so I would never, ever forget what freedom felt like." He squeezed her hand. "You are free." "I know," she whispered, leaning into his side. "It is more than that, Silas. I am finally home." He wrapped his arm around her. They both understood the heavy weight of failing someone you love. But somehow, standing right there, they had found a way to set that burden down. Not to forget, but to carry it together. And in that little Montana town, a plain blue dress swayed on a clothesline, a quiet testament blowing in the summer wind. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.